and get started, if that's all right. Um, Welcome, everybody. It's hard to believe, but we've already now gone through almost 3 weeks of our course, and it's gone by really fast, hasn't it? Well, for me. For you, maybe it feels like it's just dragging by, but but for you, it may feel like that. But for me, it's flying by. So after this week, we're already halfway done with the class, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface. I feel so far the class is a little bit like the way I eat potluck, because I have a formula to potluck. I get a plate, and then I get a little tiny bit of everything, because you never know if you actually like everything. And then once I've sampled everything, then I can go back and I can get what I really want if there's still some left. Well, this class is a little bit like going through the potluck line the first time, where you just kind of get a little sample of things. You get to kind of lick everything, but you don't really get to feast on anything. And hopefully, the point of the class is that we're hoping that you will be inspired to want to, on your own time, maybe sometime in the future, to go back. Maybe you say, boy, we just introduced the Odyssey. We just introduced Oedipus. I want to read it. I want to look at it carefully. That's kind of the point of the class. Let me say a couple things about your papers. Things have been very busy for me the past couple days. I have looked at all of your papers, but I have not begun to grade them all. I have graded probably a third of the papers, and the third that I have read, marvelous. Okay, so this is one of the things I really wondered about on an online class. Would the papers be any good? But it turns out that either because you're also brilliant, which of course is likely true, or also just because just the nature of the relaxed way of approaching class in an online class, your papers are wonderful. I think I've enjoyed reading the papers that I've seen so far as much as any class I have ever taught. I've been teaching Ancient Western Lit for about 15 years, and I am so excited and impressed. Some of the papers I think would be wonderful for even submitting to the writing awards that we have, where you get $1,000. It would be for likely the expository essay category. I think that would be neat if we had some of our online students win that award. But just love the papers. I tried to make comments where I felt the need, or if I felt like there was something I kind of hoped you would have considered further. But I enjoyed how the papers have challenged my own thinking, and I like to see that in some of the papers the class has challenged your thinking. So we're all kind of having thinking challenged. I will get those done. It probably won't get all done until the weekend. Just the nature of my life right now. Very, very, very busy. But I do want to point out something, and that is that I have already put up paper number 2. And this paper is a full-on 100% reaction paper. I'm calling it paper number 2, Wrestle an Angel. It's a little different approach than I had planned to take. It looks a little different than perhaps the way I described it in the syllabus. But I really like what I was reading, and I would like more of it. So I have asked, if you can see the spot there, I'm asking you to contend with just one idea in the class that has challenged you. Something that we have encountered via the literature, something we have encountered via perhaps one of our lectures, something that has challenged us via the discussions on Google Classroom, Maybe even something that another student posted that challenged you. I would like you just to write a simple 500 to 750 word essay where you choose a single concept of some sort we have discussed or in class or has come up in some way or has come up in some way you felt in the reading, even if we haven't specifically talked about it. Where you felt like, wow, that challenged my typical way of looking at that. For example, we talked a little bit about creation. Talked about Lilith last class period. We talked about Adam and Eve. We talked about just mythology and myths in general, or heroism, or polytheism, or monotheism, fate and fatalism, which I want to finish talking about. The femme fatale. We're going to address the Oedipus complex. Anything that has in any way proven to be a kind of fun challenge to you. And by that I mean it's not just shatter your whole way of looking at the world, but just something that made you say, huh, or that's interesting. Then I would love to have you react to it in the paper. It can be a first-person essay. It can be why you find it interesting. It can be how it is that this particular idea captures your imagination. And then I've asked you to simply come up with whether or not this new concept or new way of looking is something that you will be adopting in the future, or whether it's something you think like that's interesting, but I intend to reject it. I'm hoping that you're not going to accept everything that we say here. Or maybe it's something that you think is interesting and you plan to study it further when you get a chance. So it's really a wide open essay. Some people love those kinds of essays where it almost feels like the boundaries are vague, and that gives you kind of a freedom to write the paper that you just kind of want to write about. Some people prefer a very structured, I want this, then this, and this, and this. But you'll notice that this is a paper that's built entirely on your thoughts, but your thoughts based on ideas that you've encountered. And if you want to get me excited, use the texts that we've used, or lectures that we've used, or ideas that we've used. So if you're talking about fate, and you want to talk a little bit about some of the literature and how it deals with fate, I'll give you a good example of fate. Again, we often mistake the Greek idea of fate, to mean that the gods have already predetermined the outcome of an event. But that is not the case always. For example, Odysseus has been fated not to be able to get home. So that is his fate, that he is not going to get home. And there is a god, a very powerful god at work, trying to make sure he never gets home. However, just because that's his fate doesn't mean that that is his predetermined outcome. Because if anyone sees toward the end, which I haven't asked you to read that far, but I'm going to give you a spoiler, he gets home. He gets home, he gets safe, he gets rid of the suitors, he gets his wife back, he gets his son back, he gets his kingdom back. So despite the fact that he's been fated to never get home, he defies fate and wins. So fate does not mean predetermined ending. Now the question that I was kind of hoping you would consider is, does Oedipus have any chance at defying fate? From the time he is born, actually even before he's born, there is an oracle that predicts that he's going to kill his father and marry his mother. And it's easy to look at that story and say, well, did he really have a chance to do anything else? Sophocles, the author of the play, says absolutely. All of the things that happen, the mistakes that he makes, ultimately lend themselves to the outcome. It's not the gods that make the outcome; it's the humans that make the outcome. I'm glad somebody said they blamed Melody blames Jocasta, because if you think about it, Jocasta, as the mother who gets the oracle, has the baby killed. But of course, the servants don't have the heart to kill the baby, so the baby lives, which means the baby goes on to grow up in an kind of an anonymous manner, which only increases the chances that the oracle is going to come true. And it's not too hard to see that if Oedipus has a weakness, he is very rash. He has a hot temper. Mark says, I think that if no one knew about the prophecy, he wouldn't have ended up in those situations. Exactly. And that is absolutely true. And that's the reason why his audiences disliked or at least were offended by the play. Because they feel like, yes, sure, you can argue that there's an oracle that says this is going to happen. But because everyone is aware of it, everybody is working to do what they think is the right thing to make it not happen, which turns out to be the exact thing to make it happen. That fatalism? Is the outcome determined, or is it not? I think that, and that would be a wonderful paper number 2 too, contending with the idea of fate and fatalism, which I've asked you a question about fate. Do Christians believe in fate, or is it the same as providence? Now, many Christians, a great many Christians who come from the Reformed tradition, anyone from a Calvinist perspective, even to a lesser degree, Luther, are certainly coming from a perspective of what is often referred to in a derogatory way. They would never refer to it this way, as predetermined, as predetermination. That your damnation or your salvation has been predetermined, or predestination. Sorry, thank you. Predestination. That I'm going to say predestination, certainly as Calvin is going to argue in for it, is very much like fatalism. It sounds an awful lot like what he's arguing is that God is all powerful and he's all good. But if he's all powerful, how is it that we can somehow rectify the fact that some people will be damned? But if you were all powerful, an all powerful God, even an all powerful God who gives free choice, is going to find some way to persuade all humans to be saved. And so he just couldn't make that work in his mind, that he is all powerful, all good, and yet some people will still choose against him. And so he comes up with the idea that it must be that he is all powerful, and he has just decided that some will get salvation and some won't. For me, I'm not a particular fan of that doctrine, but for some, that gives them great comfort. And it's a very common, as a matter of fact, I would say it's one of the dominant theological ideas that runs through Protestantism. So I would say that's certainly fate and bordering on fatalism. I want to read something really quick, though, that I thought was kind of interesting. I'm going to switch over. I read faithfully everything you write. And one of the questions I asked from Monday's lecture is right here. I asked, why is the femme fatale so prevalent in literature? There's some really good answers. I love how Mark pointed out the same, a similar reason that Bond is so popular, which seems a good answer since one of our great Bonds died this week. But here's the question I was interested in. Number two, in what ways are women dangerous to men? So it's clear that in masculine literature, literature written by men, this sort of continued archetype, the femme fatale, keeps popping up. The dangerous, fatal female. And the idea that the sexy female is dangerous. And so I asked the question, well, what exactly makes them dangerous? And I wanted to read some of the answers here. This is from Cassie. She said, women can be dangerous to men in many ways. One way is women can be very manipulative and can figure out how to get what they want. Of course, men can do that too. Mark said this. Traditionally, men often will lower expectations when dealing with women or feel protective toward the opposite sex, allowing the men to be manipulated or tricked into lowering the guard. And of course, all we have to do is think about stories like Delilah and Samson and such. I've known many womanizing men who have lied to and used women over and over, yet then become putty in the hands of the woman. And some men become submissive to the point that they give up their dreams and independence entirely to keep a woman happy. And this is something that I won't say happens all the time, but I will say it happens a lot, where you'll see a man often, become what we often refer to as a whipped man. But I want you to hear this one from Melody. She doesn't mind that I use her name, but I think it's just such a fantastic answer. Women are very dangerous to men. There are many examples in myth and history of a man that has been led to destruction by a woman. The sirens of the Greeks, the banshees of the Irish, Samson and Delilah, David and Bathsheba, although in that one I think David was just as much a problem there. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, absolutely. Cleopatra, Mata-Hari, the list goes on. It is a standard joke in television and movies of the man that thinks with parts of his body other than his brain. And Michael Bolton sings in the song, when a man loves a woman, that when she is bad, she can't see it. He can't see it. She can do no wrong. If she is playing him for a fool, he's the last one to know. Loving eyes can never see. There have been experiments with rats and yes, people that have found that stimulation of the pleasure centers of the brain, such as occurs in sexual euphoria, is so addictive that those studied would self-stimulate by activating the electrodes rather than eat, even to the point of starvation. So we often see this. And one of the aspects I would also argue is that women can be very dangerous in that they are civilizing. There's something about women that the wild man suddenly becomes civilized. And for a lot of men, this is a terrifying thought. For others, it's like, oh, thank God. So, like for my son, oh, please don't tell him I said this. I would love to see him find a civilizing woman. But, oh, please don't tell him I said that. So, anyway, I would like to talk just a few things about Oedipus. Oedipus as a play is an interesting play because it's actually one of three plays. And if you did buy the book called The Three Theban Plays, you'll notice that Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus the King, is the middle play. Now, it's actually the first in chronology of events, because Antigone should really actually be the sequel, which is about Oedipus's daughter, since it's daughter to Oedipus's mother, I've often wondered, does that make Antigone his daughter and also his sister? I guess it does. And if she has children, does that make them his grandchildren, but also his nieces and nephews? I don't know. You begin to get on my own grandpa in my mind. But it's a story that story that in Antigone, where she's trying to make it so that her brother can be buried. The end of the play of Oedipus, I'm going to assume that everyone has either watched it or read it. At what point in the play do you think that Oedipus knows the truth, despite the fact that he's continuing on with his investigation as to what happened? At what point do you think he understood and continued to go? If you think you know the answer or feel you have an answer, type it on the side there. It feels like when he first hears about the robbers that killed the old king, the place where three roads meet. Mark argues it's almost when he's confronted by the seer, so that he begins to deflect. Both of those excellent answers, because I think early on he certainly is beginning to see. Faith also agrees that perhaps it's when he hears the seer or the prophet. He seems rather angry about it. That anger must have a reason to be justified, and the only justification I can think of is that he feels a little guilty, like, oh my goodness, maybe I am the killer of my own father, and that I have married my own mother. It's a good point. Some people would say, Melody says, most people would be ticked off at being accused of murder. And that is true, but the seer provides some evidence that I think is awfully specific. But for sure, I would say that he begins to know when he begins to recall the scene with the men who are at that place where three roads meet, and the murders that took place, because he recalls having done the murders and not realizing it was the king. He didn't realize he was killing a king or his father, but he recalls doing the killing. And I think this is where he begins to realize, at least in some way, that this is what's going on. And so you could argue, despite his anger, despite his irritability, that he is fully coming to terms with the fact that he is the guilty party, and yet bravely goes through. Now, this is the reason why the Greeks, who were familiar with the Oedipus myth long before Sophocles' play, would have viewed Oedipus as a Promethean kind of hero. Not a hero in that he is out fighting battles, but that he's ultimately willing to allow the investigation to go to its full fruition, even if he is the one that is pronounced guilty, in order to save the city. I think it's too much, perhaps, to say that this makes him a Christ figure, but it's not too much to say that he's a kind of Promethean figure, where he ultimately is sacrificing himself to lift the plague. I think that, as Mark says, that it was not was that not considered a little extreme to have killed strangers for a bop on the head? Well, absolutely. I would say that Oedipus, while he is a noble figure, he is a very flawed figure. And the fact that his anger allows him to kill people for something as simple as getting maybe a little knock on his noggin is a sign that he does have a serious flaw. And it's this flaw, one could argue, and I think Sophocles would argue, that is ultimately the thing that brings about Oedipus's curse. It is this flaw that ultimately is going to lead him to kill his father, and this flaw as well that ultimately leads him to marrying his mother. And I do too. I think it's not hubris, but the fatal flaw really, though, although it certainly could be that is that anger, the hubris, and certainly the hubris as well of marrying Jocasta, that would not be. I don't even know that I would look at that poorly on his part, because he's trying to unite the people. Now, there's a lot of debate about when Jocasta realizes that, oh my goodness, this is my son. This is my little baby. I thought we had killed. I thought that I had personally ordered, even though she told everyone her husband ordered, but the servant makes clear she personally ordered his death. And that son is, oops, been sleeping in her bed. Oops. Now, Melody argues that she thinks she already knew when the play begins, and that her suicide is in the shame of others knowing. What do you all think? Do you agree with her, or do you disagree with that? I would love to hear. Do you think, does she know all along that she's basically been having children with her son, or does she not? We don't have anything in the text that says otherwise. I would agree with Mark that she puts it together more quickly than Oedipus does. She seems a little quicker than that. Oh, and Faith disagrees though that. Faith, I'm just curious, do you disagree with what Mark's saying? Oh, you're saying that she knew the prophecy. So, okay, so several of you feel like she knew already. And in that sense, I think that actually you could argue that she would be the villain of the story. Is it safe to say if she's aware, then she's the villain? If she's not aware and she finds out later, then she is maybe still, a villain, but not, maybe you have some sympathy for her. But yeah, as Faith says, she did piecing together the whole thing. You would think the fact that he has the problem with his ankles, because the ankles were tethered, they were actually pierced the way you would pierce an animal. Essentially what you would do is you would pierce an animal's ankles and feet so you could carry it upside down, like some fish or some rabbits. And so that's how she had her own baby delivered, which I don't know, that makes her seem rather monstrous right there. No matter which side is right, the fact of the matter is that at some point, Jocasta comes face to face with the shame, whether it's the shame of finally being found out, some like Melody and Faith, I think, and Marianne are arguing, or the shame of realizing, oh my goodness, everything we tried, no matter how hard we tried to prevent this, it happened anyway. And she goes in and she hangs herself. It's one of the most moving scenes in all of stagecraft. That scene where Oedipus comes out. Now, one would think that Oedipus's logical action would be to do the same, to kill himself. But instead, he takes the brooches, so she's hung, so she takes the brooches that are holding together her garment, pulls them off. One of the interesting things that Harold Bloom noticed in an interesting essay was that by pulling off the brooches, that would have stripped her naked. So now at this point, she is in all her shame. He pulls the brooches, and he gouges out his own eyeballs. And just says, light, you light, no more light. And then he comes out in that horrific scene where he's in it with the mask. It's very dramatic because with the mask you can make it look like blood is coming down the mask. But he comes out blind. A couple of things I would love to say about this. One is that Oedipus, this is not the end of Oedipus's story. It's at the end of the play. But it's not the end of Oedipus's story. The play itself has almost no action. I don't know if you noticed that. Instead, any sort of action that does take place takes place off stage. The supposed killing of the baby took place elsewhere. The supposed giving of the baby somewhere else. The death of the king. The Sphinx. That's right. None of those things happen on the stage. They're only spoken of in a kind of speech. This is the manner in which the Greek drama is done. In other words, what's going on here is we're watching drama as we know it be invented. Because in the time of Homer, let's find the chorus here in a moment. If you understand, I mean, in Homer's day, he is a bard, so he's one man performing everybody's parts through lengthy speeches. Well, somewhere along the road, someone gets the idea of, rather than having one person play the same person through different speeches, what if we got several actors and they each came out and gave lengthy speeches? And eventually that's going to come to the point where you have Sophocles, and you're going to have, what are some of the other names that's slipping right now as contemporaries, get the harebrained idea that not only could we have the actual characters speak of actions, but they could speak to each other. We began to have a thing called dialogue. It seems funny that we'd have to think that we would have to invent dialogue on a stage, but we do. And now the chorus, which is a little interesting invention in Greek theater, the chorus represents the thinking and the thoughts of the people. So it's not the same as a narrator. I've seen Greek plays done where the chorus functions as a kind of narrator. But that is not what the chorus is supposed to be. The chorus is supposed to represent the thinking of the people. Now, in the play that I posted for you to watch, they actually have the people speak, and maybe that captures it nicely. Even if you have one person be that figure, it's meant to be the voice of the people. This is an idea that later on, by the time of Shakespeare, will go away. We no longer need the chorus because the audience can figure out for themselves what they think, although there will be similar things such as that. So it reflects the thoughts of what's going on. It's almost as if the playwrights feel like we need to give you a kind of an omniscient view. You're seeing what's going on stage, but we're going to give you an even more divine perspective here of the thoughts of what's going on and the feel of the stage. We call, by the way, and it's interesting that we as an audience are aware of what's going on. long before the actors or the characters on the stage do. Okay, this is really important. And Oedipus Rex is given the credit for being the play to invent a thing called dramatic irony. I'd love for you to remember that. Dramatic irony. This is a brilliant invention. Essentially what it is it means the audience knows more about what's going on than the characters in the play do. And that's true. I mean, to be honest, I mean, we already know the Oedipus story. We already know he has killed his father and with his mother. We already know all of that, so we're just waiting to see how it all happens. We know more than everybody on that stage. And we call it dramatic irony. And one of the reasons scholars love to credit Oedipus Rex as one of the greatest works of human achievement is because it is regarded as the first dramatic irony. I disagree with that. I actually think there is a drama that is older than Oedipus that has dramatic irony, and it's in the Bible, and that's the book of Job. Job is likely much older than Oedipus, although it has a lot of similar feel to Greek theater. It's meant to be performed on a stage. I don't know if you knew that, but Job is a play where you're given an introductory background story, and then you have characters who come and through lengthy speeches tell their side of the story. So you have Job's friend will come out and give a speech, then Job will respond, and then the friend will respond to Job. But we, because we're given that information at the beginning of the book, know more about what's going on than anybody else in the story other than God. So we know more than Job, we know more than the friends, we know more than the wife. I would argue that Job is the first example of dramatic irony. And so if you're going to give Oedipus Rex all this great credit for being the inventor of this, then I personally would like to see that credit go to Job as well. This isn't to take anything away from the achievement of Oedipus. It's just that this just shows you how brilliant the book of Job is. And some of you said that was your favorite. So can you explain the Greek course? Okay, and reflecting the thoughts of the audience, reflecting the thoughts of each character, and the God in the machine. Absolutely. So, and Mark said, I'd love to see a play version of Job. You know, here at Union College, about 15 years ago, we did that. We performed Job as a play. We don't think about it, but it's meant to be performed that way. So it's meant to be performed. These are speeches that they're highly stylized speeches. These are probably not the way people are actually talking. They're written in very stylized poetry, as is all theater at the time. And you do get a different sense of the entire epicness of the story. And then, of course, at the end, the whirlwind, I mean, God shows up. My own view, I don't want to get off track on Job, but I love the book of Job. But I also think that Job is probably one of the most misread and misunderstood books in the Bible. We read the book of Job and argue that it's trying to tell us why good things happen to bad people. Why bad things happen to good people. I think, quite frankly, that is a horrific idea. Absolutely horrific. I don't think that's the point of the book. I don't think that has ever been the point of the book. And I sure hope that it's not the point of the book, because if the point of Job is that, here's an explanation for why bad things happen to good people, then the answer is that God and Satan are playing games with us. And we're just like toys. And then suddenly that makes our world suddenly a little more terrifying, a little more like the Greeks. I don't think that's the point of Job. I think the point of Job is we're given a kind of a sneak behind the scenes, and then we have the friends coming out, and they speak in perfect songs. They speak, I mean, the speeches of Job's friends, we could pop them out right out of the book, put them in Psalms, and we would think these are beautiful songs. And yet, because of what we know is going on behind the scenes, we know they're wrong. Job, on the other hand, is actually speaking blasphemy. He is, as Job's friends point out, they're like, hey, stop, you're speaking blasphemy. He is speaking blasphemy. And yet, because we know behind the scenes, we know that Job is right. The book of Job is the most amazing book in the Bible, because what it essentially is it's the Bible's own way of saying there's more going on than you can see. And even sometimes when people are giving their religious talk and they think they know all the right answers, don't be so sure. Trust in God, there's more going on in the world. And then finally, God shows up at the end, and we're thinking, all right, this is it. God's going to give us the answer. Who's right, who's wrong? And instead, God says, hey, were you there when I created the world? Were you there when I did all this stuff? No, you don't know anything, and I'm not going to tell you. Now, please be quiet. And that's the end of the book. So the point of the book is not why do bad things happen to good people. The point of the book is just that there's more going on than you can see. And as God finally comes out in the end and say, and I'm not going to tell you it. So I prefer that view, and we could talk about that if anyone wants to at another time. Because that's a big deal to me, because I love that book. I want to jump ahead, if I can, to something that has often bothered me about Oedipus, and that is that whenever I talk about Oedipus, there's always a snicker, because somebody wants to bring up the Oedipus complex. Sigmund Freud, who is the great father of the subconscious, the great father in many ways of psychoanalysis, and we're indebted to him for so many things, and yet his ideas in psychology have all but been debunked, and we don't treat him very seriously in that context anymore. However, in the literary world, if any of you go on to graduate school and study English literature, Freud is worshipped, because Freudian thought, while it may not be very useful in helping people work through their personal problems anymore, his ideas make a wonderful way of interpreting literature. And so we have Freudian analysis. And I think that that's because Freud, maybe even more than a clinician and a studier of people, was a voracious reader of literature. And so he gets his Oedipus complex, which is the fundamental point of his overall theory. Let me talk a little bit about that. Oh, I'm not asking you to answer these questions. But Sigmund Freud read literature as avidly as he studied people. And there's no question about it. And I think that's why you almost could say he's one of our greatest literary critics, even though we don't think of him as one of our great behavioral scientists anymore. And the Oedipus complex, or the so-called Oedipus complex, I wrote, Freud drew from the myth of Oedipus the king in order to describe the attraction a child feels, especially a boy, feels toward the parent of the opposite sex, and the rivalry and hostility it feels toward the parent of its own. In other words, he had a theory that in the very youngest stage, especially a boy, will become attracted to his mother and will want to kill his father, maybe not literally, but metaphorically. This idea of his occurs during the phallic stage of the child's psychosexual development of the personality, approximately years 3 to 5. So when a child is 3 to 5 years old, and it's not hard to look at that and see a little boy, very much attached to his mother at 3 to 5. I don't remember ever being attracted to my mother in that way, or wanting to kill my father, and the resolution of the Oedipus complex is believed to occur by the identification with the parent of the same sex and by the renunciation of sexual interest in the parent of the opposite sex. In other words, you no longer have the hots for your mother. Freud considered this complex the cornerstone of his theory of the superego and the nucleus of all human relationships. Indeed, if you take away this idea, his entire theory of the ego, superego, and such kind of fall apart. Many psychiatrists, while acknowledging the significance of the Oedipal relationships to personality development in our culture, ascribe love and attraction toward one parent and hatred and antagonism toward the other, not necessarily to sexual rivalry, but to resentment of parental authoritarian power. And that's really where we've gone more now. Behavioral science now would argue that it has nothing to do with having the hots for your mother, and more just with children learning where their boundaries are. But how did Freud come up with this theory that most people think is a little kooky? Well, he did it by reading literature. And this is his actual text, okay, translated into English, of course. And notice he starts out with what seems like a very good interpretation of the play. He says, "You all know the Greek legend of King Oedipus, who is destined by fate to kill his father and take his mother to wife, who did everything possible to escape the oracle's decree and punished himself by blinding when he learned that he had nonetheless unwittingly committed both these crimes." Thus far, you must agree that Freud has given a wonderful synopsis of the play. If any of you wrote that, I would say absolutely, that pretty much sums up the play. Here's where he goes astray. Notice what he says here. Sophocles' play, Oedipus Rex, illustrates a formative stage in each individual's psychosexual development, when the young child transfers his love object from the breast, the oral phase, to the mother. At this time, the child desires the mother and resents, even secretly desires, the murder of the father. I want to argue that, ironically enough, as prevalent as this idea is, and really one of the Time magazine had a thing of the 100 most important ideas of the modern world, and they had this one as number 2, second only to Einstein's theory of relativity, and actually ahead of Darwin's theory of evolution. So it's a very revolutionary idea, and wrong, absolutely wrong, because yes, I'm going to show you a naked cartoon, and it's not me. I don't think that the story of Oedipus shows somebody who is out of control in a situation, somebody who is secretly attracted to his mother and secretly wants to kill his father at all. I think that Freud has incredibly misread this play, and as a result has damaged the value of the play to further readers. I don't know that anyone can read this play post-Freud without thinking of Freud in that sense. I would like to liberate Sophocles' great play from Freud, and to see that as something that, as well, that's a very bad use of the text. Yeah, here, let me show you a graphic cartoon. So close your eyes if you're frightened of naked women depicted in humorous cartoons. This is actually from the 1930s. And I agree with Mark. He doesn't want. He leaves his own adopted family to prevent himself from killing. I mean, he's doing everything possible. This isn't like a childlike madness of any sort. But in a 1930s New Yorker, here's a cartoon that came out about what's on Freud's mind, and I think that that was true for a lot of people. Here, I'm going to show it to you right now. Dun, dun, dun. It's cute, even though it's kind of naughty. But I think that Freud sometimes just had sex on the brain, and that's got in the way of his theories. Anyway, when we look back on this play, though, I think that Sophocles is desperately trying to come to grips with a challenging idea, and that is, how much control do human beings have over their lives? Do they have any control over their lives? And if they do have control over their lives, does the fact that the gods might predict the outcome, does that mean that it must be? If I could say one other thing, there is a third play in the Oedipus trilogy called Oedipus at Colonus, which I highly recommend. If you bought the book, read Oedipus Rex, read Antigone, and read Oedipus at Colonus. Because Oedipus, as an old man, takes on the role of the seer. The same kind of a person that the seer or the prophet is what Oedipus becomes. He becomes that. And again, notice he's blind, like the blind Tiresias. He is a prophet like Tiresias. He's a prophet like the blind Tiresias, who we find in the underworld. Have you ever it's interesting that in literature over and over again, even in anime, I love anime, and this happens a lot in anime, prophets are often shown to be blind. One of the reasons is, of course, Justice is blind. Also, thank you, Mark. Homer himself was considered to be blind. We don't know if it's true, but I sure love that idea. And if not blind, prophets are often in some way given a handicap of some sort. They're deaf or they're crippled. But blind is the most common. Probably one of the reasons is that and it's true that now Tiresias becomes blind because he trades his sight for wisdom in the mythology. So he's like, I want a knowledge of the future in exchange for my eyes. But instead, the mischievous god takes his eyes and only gives him knowledge of the day he's going to die. So Tiresias gets a really bad deal there. But I think also the reason why prophets are often shown to be blind or with other senses that are handicapped is that we often have a sense that somebody, say, who's blind, that their other senses are heightened. And that is how we often view people who are pathetic. Ooh, thank you, Daredevil, good example. Their other senses are heightened, and therefore they achieve a kind of superpower as a result of those other senses that are so much higher than if they would have been if they could see. So this happens over and over again in literature. Maybe a little in the Bible, but more so in the Greek and the Roman, but also in Mesopotamian, in Norse and Celtic myths, in African myths as well, where the prophet is blind. So prophets have often are shown with a kind of disability. Melody pointed out that Ellen White, our Adventist prophet, hit with a rock and was given a kind of disability, if you will. And and also Paul, when Paul has that Damascus Road moment, he is blinded, and it's the blindness where he gets the wisdom in that time period. So there's something in that becomes a wonderful metaphor over and over again. And this doesn't take away the truth and try to mix truths and myths and things like that. But it just is interesting how all of our myths and all of our histories and all of our stories over and over and over again have these same sort of interesting recurring themes. And there's something to that. Now, Carl Jung, who is the protege of Freud, who ultimately left Freud because he just felt like Freud was just obsessed with sex. He argued that the reason why all of our myths have all these recurring themes is what he called the collective unconscious. Is that because of years of evolution that we have somehow these sorts of themes have become a part of our lives. I would love in some ways to hear what you think on that. And I may make that one of my questions. Anyway, I enjoyed this play a great deal. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have not had a chance to see it yet, it's worth seeing. If any of you are writers, I think it would make a wonderful kind of modern retelling. Because it really is fascinating, the idea of somebody destined to do something, and you try as hard as you can. Can I just say one other thing about the place where three roads meet? This is an interesting moment in the story for me, because as one who loves mythologies, in North American mythologies, in particular, both Native American mythologies, but also African American mythologies, the crossroads, the place where the roads meet, in African American traditions or mythologies, the devil is always waiting for you there. So if something's going to happen, either a moment of revelation or a moment of temptation, it's going to happen there where the roads meet. And I every time I hear that, I'm like, it's perfect. If any of you are familiar with the great music of Robert Johnson, the great blues, really the first great blues artist, claimed to sell his soul when he met the devil at the place, at the fork roads, the crossroads. Over and over again, that's in the blues about meeting at the crossroads, because the devil's at the crossroads. If any of you have seen A Brother, Where Art Thou? And the devil meets him at the crossroads. And it's supernatural. Yes, thank you, Mark. This is a concept that shows up. And again, the devil went down to Georgia. The devil meets at the crossroads. And I think that that's a fitting metaphor. Not that there's a devil literally waiting every time you come to a fork in the road, but isn't it true that at that moment of temptation, the place when you're trying to decide which way am I going to go, that's where the devil waits. So that seems like a marvelous mythology. That, and like all mythologies, there's a kind of truth in them. The devil waits for us in the crossroads. Anyway, I've been talking quite a bit. Any final questions before I let you go? Any final thoughts? Just want to remind you, of course, I'll be emailing your grades. Unfortunately, this is one of the downsides to Google Classroom. It doesn't have a grade program, although we've been told that Google is working on it. So actually, possibly by the fall, they will have that, but that won't have archives. So I will email your grades to you probably this weekend. And so that's how you'll know that. The assignments, just keep up on the assignments, keep answering the lecture questions. I think you're all doing a wonderful job. I'm really, really enjoying your just even getting to know you in this kind of way. Won't get to meet again till Monday. But here's a question. Monday is Memorial Day. Now, typically we don't have class on that day. And so what I'm going to do though, rather than requiring you to meet on Monday, is I'm going to upload a video for you on Monday. There will not be a live session on Monday. It's Memorial Day. It's a holiday. And but you will get a chance to see me. I'm going to upload a video. Please keep your eyes open for that. And final questions? Big thank you to Mark, who's been helping us so we can put them on the Google Classroom. Have a great evening, everybody. Go do something good for your soul. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day. If you have further questions, feel free to hang out for a sec.